Ahoy, everyone. This is David Perry with my continuing series of interviews with clients, colleagues, friends, artists, and in this case, authors from around the world talking about their work and how we are going to get from what I like to call the great pause of 2020 into the great recovery of 2021. And today I'm delighted to be in the Zoom room with my fellow author, Madhav Misra, talking about his new book, Labyrinth of the Wind. And I have to say, I'm very impressed with one of his early reviews from Tom Parker, an O. Henry Prize winner and Pulitzer Prize nominee, who says, "Love, greed, fear, and intimidation, the Shah's imperial dreams and fledgling nuclear ambitions, this guides us through the labyrinth and ultimately reveals the way out." So, Madhav, congratulations on quite an amazing early review. Pulitzer Prize nominee.
Thank you, David. Appreciate this opportunity to speak with you.
So I understand that your book is about to launch, correct?
Yeah, the official launch date is February the 1st, and it's been available for early reviews since the beginning of January. So we wanted to make it a 2021 book. And I guess you as an author know that this is actually one of the better times to be launching a book in the first quarter of each year.
So tell me, how did you get the idea for A Labyrinth of the Wind, and how much of it is, we know it's fiction, but how much of it is based on your life or someone else's life?
Well, I've been wanting to write about certain kind of experiences, and I think we should, I have the view that one should write from a place and a tradition and create characters that do authentic things, believable things, and let them go where they might. So I had several experiences that I wanted to write about as I went about my business career, including, obviously, I was in Tehran. I was sent to Tehran, in early 1976 for a short assignment. And I went rather unwillingly because I was enjoying London at the time. It was one of the world's great places in the mid-70s. And I was surprised to find how interesting life in Tehran was. And before long, I had a big job offer, and you have lived abroad, David, you'll understand that expatriates tend to get better job offers than they would back home at a younger age. And suddenly I was chief financial officer of a big energy company with a lot of people reporting to me. And the years went by, and before I knew it, I was looking for an evacuation flight out of Tehran as we were under curfew, and guns were, you could hear the guns at night. And the only source of news was the BBC. And I wanted to use that kind of as a backdrop, but also write about things that were important to me, that particularly the 70s. They were a time of, freedom, aspiration, and a range of choices that young people hadn't really had before, with severe consequences. But you had those choices, and they were available not just to Americans or Europeans, but to what I call a global nation state of the mind. And I want to write about, from an Indian perspective, that Indian breaking away from the past and the shackles of colonialism and kind of the clannish thinking of family in the developing world, where you're supposed to become a lawyer, doctor, accountant, get a good job, settle down. And my cohort of Indians was the first to start going into film, creating advertising agencies, starting new businesses. So I want to write about that aspect of choice and freedom. And then, of course, throughout, you have the sense that I didn't really know how many books I was going to write. And I had all these fading memories of, I come from a very large family. And, we have an oral tradition. And there were such fascinating stories in there. And I wanted to weave this together, but I wanted to use a structure in a place that I understood. And that was really the world of Naipaul, Graham Greene, Conrad, of kind of flawed protagonists, to use Naipaul's term, in half-made places. So that was kind of and I thought, finally I got a chance to, I sold an equity interest in a startup business in San Francisco where I was not allowed to work for a year. And a friend suggested, why don't you go down to Stanford? They have a writing program. And I must say, they really helped me, the writing program and the various workshops, to move this in the direction of the novel.
Right. So you used a phrase that I find wonderfully compelling, the global community of the mind. Tell me what you mean by that, and when did that concept come to you?
It came to me as I spent more and more time, first in London, then Tehran, then New York City, Washington, D.C., San Francisco. And I really felt that there were more similarities than differences in the people I was hanging around with, people from all over the world. And basically, it was something that'll be familiar to you as an American, this whole idea of pursuit of happiness. It sounds corny, I know, but this whole aspect that you can start thinking of that and not feeling selfish, the whole sense that there are no real shackles, geographic or any others around. And I found that the people I was with were similar kind of people, and they were from Europe, they were from Asia, they were from all over the place. And we were quite the same. And so I stuck with that idea. And for example, the three people, some three or four people in the characters in the novel, Ayan, Gabby, and the Iranian character, his love interest, or basically they all had this idea of America rather than their traditional world as a lodestar.
So during the period of your novel in 1970s Tehran, was the United States looked to as a quote unquote, to use a cliche, beacon of freedom, even under the Shah of that period?
Yeah, very much so, because the only other frame of reference for young people wanting to break away from the constraints of home was a colonial power. It could have been the French in Africa, but for us, it was the English. And there were certain colonial limitations that America had thrown off. And, it was really an echo of the Vietnam protests that had died out. It was American rock and roll and the music of Dylan. And, that was resonating around the world and creating this global community. It was Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. It was the ideals, and they formed kind of the boundaries of, or really gave shape to this global community of the mind.
So many times I've thought that the current political situation we're in a very real sense, from the perspective of the United States, began with the Iranian Revolution. It seems to have been one very long period between 1979 and now. Do you think that there is some truth to that we're still living in the post-Iranian Revolution era?
I would agree with that, David, because I was really surprised, when you're in the middle of a revolution and your focus is really trying to get out, and you're trying to survive, basically. I was the only one in the group that could go out for groceries, because if you were white, you were beaten up on the streets of Tehran. So, we were in a survival mode, and I didn't, for the last 6-7 months there, I didn't really think enough about my experience there. And earlier, I was living in such a expatriate high life that I really didn't think about the culture of Iran and the people of Iran. And now, on reflection, you realize that it completely changed the Middle East, the Iranian Revolution. And being a big country and a powerful country, a proud country, it forced the whole world to pay attention, both the Islamic world and the Christian world, and as well as the rest of the world, had to start reframing their self-perception based on Ayatollah Khomeini's image of Iran
Mhm.
and what that implied in terms of geopolitics. So I think, in a way, certainly from an international affairs point of view, you're right. And so whether it's the folks in Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, the folks in Syria, Libya, they're all influenced heavily by what Iran is going to do next.
Yes.
And I think sorry, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
Before we discovered oil, and I know fracking is terrible, etc., but before we became self-sufficient in oil pretty much in the United States, the US had to pay attention to that region, because it was essential for our economic survival. And therefore, we were focused on Iran too. And then this whole idea of, the whole idea of nuclear capability. The first person who really made use of that and forced a post-colonial rethink was Indira Gandhi.
Mm-hmm.
She, in the early 70s, 74, had tested an atomic bomb using, on a covert basis. And it changed the whole dynamic. And you look at declassified documents from the Kissinger Nixon era, and their focus was trying to get through to China, build a relationship with China, and the Pakistan was central to the bridge to China. And right then, the East and West Pakistan started splitting up, and Indira Gandhi decided to liberate what's now called Bangladesh. But cut a long story short, the 7th Fleet was sent by Nixon to teach that dash a lesson, Indira Gandhi.
Mm-hmm.
And she had signed a deal, or somebody had signed a deal with the Russians to, if there was a nuclear threat to India, the Russians would automatically respond. And without her having to ask for it, a nuclear submarine started tailing the 7th Fleet in the Bay of Bengal, and they immediately turned around and left.
Right.
And that lesson stayed with her, so she pushed through this bomb, which mixed feelings about, but it forced another global rethink. So in addition to the Iranian Revolution, which was really a revolution against the American overthrow of Mossadegh, who were democratically elected prime minister. It was really the Iranian Revolution was just a reaction to that.
Right. So your book is clearly rich and deep in political intrigue, scientific envelope pushing, set against the backdrop of the very fertile 1970s. In just encapsulating in general, what is the plot? We know the setting, but who are the main characters briefly? And without giving away, of course, the ending, how do they move through this labyrinth of the wind?
So basically, and as I mentioned, I thought of the idea of the protagonist is a young Indian who starts off with a very similar background to mine, because you write from a place that you know, and then and I let him start evolving, and he changes over time. He's physically very different from me, but he changes over time based on his choices and circumstances. And then I thought to myself, well, it should really be, if he's got all this passion inside him and is making all these dramatic choices, there has to be a love interest. I remember Deepak Chopra telling me at a corporate event in Palo Alto that every good story is a love story. And that stayed with me. You had to have that as a driving force. It couldn't just be money or ambition. That I thought would be boring for me to write about and boring for somebody to read about. So the central plot is this love affair between this 28-year-old Indian and this German pilot for Iran Air, who is really his conscience. And while he's reaching out for the world, like a good quote unquote American, and she is pulling him back to kind of his, to think about the people of Iran. And she's a Badr Meinhof supporter, a Red Army supporter, even though she's very well established. So it's really the push and pull between the two of them. And then, of course, I throw in another character, Hamid, who is, and you'll recognize this if you've lived in many countries, you become very close expatriates with their drivers. You have long commutes. They often explain the country to you. They become more of a friend. And I made Hamid the face of the Iranian Revolution, where he explains to Ayan what's going on. And so Ayan has three influences. One is he has his ambitions. Two is Gabby is making him think about more meaningful things. And Hamid is making him think about what's going on below the surface in Iran. Right. And it's really the three main characters. And you have the revolution in Germany. The book starts a week after the Germany was brought to his knees by the Red Army. And the day when Khomeini's son is killed by the secret police of the Shah, the Savak, in Iraq, sparking the first protests in Iran.
Well, it sounds like a fascinating tale. I mean, and it's so rich in intrigue and in politics. We've only got just a few moments left. Yes. Talk to me, if you would, quickly about how you got the idea for the title. And in our closing moments, tell our audience what you would like people to take away from reading this novel, Labyrinth of the Wind.
Well, the title really comes as a result. I was pestering my wife, who reads a book a day, who's a Shakespearean scholar, and who basically, I said, come on, you must, I read out all the great titles I loved. And she thought about it, and she went to this poem by Yeats. And the title comes from, there's a line there, and it says Labyrinth of the Wind. And I started studying how he uses the labyrinth and wind as metaphors. And they were so perfect for kind of the wind as a destructive force that blows away civilization, but also represents unmanageable internal forces of love and passion. And then the labyrinth is the journey deep inside. And as a scholar of, I can see in your books, you've written a lot about the Christian faith, the Catholic faith. The labyrinth has a lot of significance in terms of an internal journey. So it comes from that. And what I'd like people to take away from it is basically kind of a universal message of, despite the times, despite the differences in cultures, we're pretty much the same. We have the same passions, motivations. So this really, the 70s were the beginning of a global world. And I think we've become even more interconnected now.
I think it's fascinating. I can't wait to read the book, Labyrinth of the Wind. Congratulations on your publication, and best of luck with the launch. I certainly know where you are with that. Launching a book during this period has been a challenge, but also a great joy. Thank you for speaking with us. And if someone wants to learn more about your book or about your work, where should they go?
They could go to my website, madhavmisra.com, MADHAVMISRA.com, and you'll find everything you need there.
Great. We look forward to it. We've been speaking with Madhav Misra, author of the new book, Labyrinth of the Wind, launching this week. This is David Perry. Thanks for watching. Ahoy.
Ahoy. Thank you, David.